Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to talk about a book which I think is not only good but also important. The Trading Game by Gary Stevenson. So let's be honest, a lot of the books I talk about on the channel are not books that anyone would call important, even me. A book like Phoenix Force, Tigers of Justice is not going to change the world. The book that I'm going to talk about today is, I think, a genuinely interesting and important book, and it's a book I hope does change the world, even in some small way. So this is a book which is very different from the kind of books I normally talk about on the channel. For a start, it's non-fiction, and I generally talk about fiction on the channel. And it's also a book about economics, which is something I know hardly anything about at all. But this was a genuinely fascinating book. So let me start by telling you who Gary Stevenson is. So Gary Stevenson is an economist and someone who made millions of pounds working as a trader for Citibank, but then turned his back on that life, had kind of a revelation about the kind of things that he was doing and the state of the economy and the worsening state of the world economy. And he now campaigns for equal distribution of wealth. So he campaigns against wealth inequality. The Trading Game is really, it reads a bit like the origin story for a superhero or something like that, in that it very much like pays the way, shows you how he got to where he is today. And what he does today is work with various organisations to help people understand the harm that wealth inequality can do. And he also has a YouTube channel which is excellent, so I've watched a fair few of his videos now, and he has a very straightforward way of talking about economic theory and explaining it in such a way that someone even like me who knows nothing about economics can understand it. So let me tell you a bit about his life and what the book is about. So Gary Stevenson grew up in the East End of London in a poor family. He was incredibly smart, very, very good at maths, and he ended up going to the London School of Economics and studying economics there. And whilst there, he managed to get an internship at Citibank, working as a currency trader. And he ended up, when he graduated from university, he ended up working at Citibank. And whilst there, he became their most successful trader. So for at least 1 year, he was the most profitable trader, and he worked on the currency desk at Citibank, basically betting on fluctuations in the exchange rate between different currencies. So, looking out for differences in economic performance across different countries and trying to figure out what that would mean for the exchange rates. And he made millions and millions of pounds for Citibank doing that, and millions of pounds for himself in bonuses before becoming disillusioned and turning his back on all of that. So this book, The Trading Game, very much tells that story. Takes him from his teenage years through his time working at Citibank to this kind of crisis of faith, and to his new life campaigning for wealth equality, albeit that is only touched on in a very small way right at the end of the book. I would love to see him write a sequel to this that talks more about his theories about the state of the world economy and why things are bad and getting worse. He's really, really interesting to hear talk about that, and as I say, it's definitely worth checking out his YouTube channel. So why is this book so good? So I think it's good for two reasons. One is it's got a really important message, which I kind of touched on already, but I'll touch on a bit more at the end. The other is it's just well written and entertaining. So it's his story is a fascinating and entertaining story, and what the book does brilliantly is pacing. So it's got really, really good pacing throughout. It's never dull, it never kind of slows down. It's always interesting to read, and you always want to keep reading to find out what's going to happen next. So it's kind of got the pace of a thriller, and it's definitely got a very satisfying kind of story arc and character arc in particular. So Gary is definitely the central character, as you would expect in a memoir, but his journey from someone who was very, very poor to someone who, gradually made more and more money, someone who externally appeared to be very, very successful, but actually wasn't getting satisfaction from all of the money he was earning. And then his growing realisation about the state of the world economy and the part that the organisation he was working for was playing in that. So it's a fascinating, almost like a classic character story arc, which makes for a very, very satisfying read. The other thing that's great about the book is partly the kind of characters characters that he works with. So some of the people he works with on the exchange desk are just absolutely crazy. Very, very colourful, very interesting characters, and he has a very good way of capturing the essence of someone in just a few, just a paragraph or two. So you do feel like you get to know these other people, and there are characters who appear fairly early on in the book and then crop up again at the end of the book, and you remember who they are. He's got that storytelling talent. That means he can juggle multiple characters, and you don't forget them. You remember them. They're very, very memorable. And he also has a great way of just setting up small scenes that are very, very effective. So the trading game is the thing that the book gets its title from, is a game that he plays at a Citibank event when he's a student at LSE, and that's one of the reasons why he ends up getting this internship at Citibank. And basically it's kind of like a card game that's designed to represent the way that trading works, and he figures out how this game works quickly, and plays it in such a way he's completely determined to win. But there's a fantastic twist at the end of that scene, which I won't spoil, but it works brilliantly as a almost like a mini sports movie. There's something very satisfying about watching people, reading about people playing a game well, and theorising about what their tactics should be and things like that. He captures all of that brilliantly, and he does that a few more times in the book, where he just sets up a scene and makes it in like an enormously satisfying kind of set piece. So he's a really, really talented writer. He's got a very interesting story to tell anyway, but he tells it in a really interesting way. I'd actually love to see him write a fiction book, just to see what it was like. So that's why the book is good. It's just an entertaining read. Why I think it's important is because of what he's telling us about the state of the world economy, and his kind of theory about the economy, or the thing that really resonated with me about what he says about the economy is this. So if you think about the economic crisis we are going through at the moment, many people are struggling financially. We've got a terrible cost of living crisis across many different countries, and a lot of people are really, really struggling. And if you look at like home ownership and things like that, it's enormously more difficult for a young person today to be able to afford and buy a home than it used to be. So in previous generations, someone who had a not particularly well-paying job, like an average-paying job, could afford a mortgage, could afford to buy a house, would live in that house through to retirement. By retirement, they would have paid off the mortgage on their house. Nowadays, that feels completely unattainable for young people, which is horrific, really, really terrible. So many people are struggling financially nowadays. And governments are struggling financially nowadays as well. You look at like in the UK, one of the things that's constantly talked about in the news at the moment is the fact that the tax burden on individuals in the UK is as high as it's been since the end of the Second World War. The reason for that is because the government hasn't got any money. They haven't got any money to fund services and things like that. So they need to tax people. So the question then becomes, given that there is essentially a finite amount of money in the world, I mean, you can have things like quantitative easing, which, create more money, but basically there's a kind of a fixed amount of money in the world. If ordinary people haven't got that money and governments haven't got that money, where's that money gone? And the answer is it's gone to incredibly rich people. So there are far more super rich people than there ever have been, and those super rich people are like ridiculously rich, like multi-billionaires, which is ridiculous. There was a statistic that was mentioned in an interview that I watched with Gary Stevenson earlier today, which was something like, I think it's that there are 4 people in the USA who have as much wealth as the poorest 50% of the population, something like that. So we have just terrible wealth inequality across the West and indeed other places nowadays, and that cannot be good for anyone. That can never be good. That leads to people being more desperate, to people being more more likely to vote more extreme political parties in. We've seen that a lot recently with quite extreme people like Javier Milei, for example, coming to power in Argentina. So, it is a destabilising thing. The more financially insecure people feel, the more likely bad stuff is to happen in the world. And that really is Gary Stevenson's message, is that we need to do something to equalise the distribution of wealth. Doesn't mean that everyone has to have exactly the same amount of money. You're always going to have some people who are wealthier than other people. But the extremes of wealth inequality that we're seeing in the world nowadays are just horrific and very, very harmful. So I hope you found that interesting. A somewhat different video from me today about a somewhat different kind of book than I normally read, but a book that I genuinely think is an important book, and a book I really do think you should give a try. I'll leave a link to Gary Stevenson's channel in the description of this video, so you can check out his videos as well. As I say, they are easily digestible, but very, very interesting and thought-provoking. Anyway, I will leave it there and say, as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.